Alrighty folks, and welcome to the Chronicle Podcast channel. This is episode 37, the Three Kingdoms period. So now we are here, the beginning of what we can really call the Three Kingdoms period in China's history. You have Cao in the north, Sun Quan in the southeast, and the newest kingdom established by Liu Bei, Shu in the southwest. There was now a tripartite balance of power between the three of these states, and we could say that a stalemate had pretty much ensued at this time. So what I will do is focus on the policies introduced by the states themselves, then wrap up this period so we can move on. Now there are a few things to note here. I'm going to be skipping over details of two major campaigns which were launched by Zhuge Liang during his time as Prime Minister of Shuhan. The reason being that I will be coming back to talk about Zhuge Liang in his own standing podcast episode. The two campaigns that I won't be mentioning in any depth are his campaign to deal with the Nanman Rebellion in 225, and then his 5 campaigns north into Taowei territory between 228 and 234. However, the big battle I will focus on today is the Battle of Yilin, which took place in 221. But more on that later. Let's focus on the policies of each state for now, and then move on to the more narrative story once again. The first state I will talk about is Wei in the north. They were the first to establish themselves, so I may as well start with them. Cao did try his best to reinstall the old days of the Qin dynasty and backed a legalist approach to statecraft. In Cao's mind, Confucianism had failed, and the only way to bring back order from this chaos was to have a strict code of law. So that meant things like curfews and a high order of policing, extremely harsh punishments for those who defied the law, and of course, if there was any sense of betrayal, Cao didn't mind killing the traitor and their entire clan. To give you an idea of how brutal Cao could be, he found out about a plot to murder him by the young Emperor Xian, his favourite concubine Dong, and as well as her father Dongchong. When Cao discovered the plot, he killed all of Dongchong's family, including the children, and then his men stormed the imperial palace and dragged out concubine Dong and out into the main hall. Terrified, concubine Dong pleaded for her life to the emperor, to which he tried to say, "Concubine Dong is pregnant, please spare her until she has the baby." To which Cao replied, "Do you really think I will let you raise a brat to avenge me?" And with that, the pregnant concubine was strangled to death while the young emperor could only watch in despair. Cao was always portrayed as this extremely paranoid ruler, and there are stories which can confirm that he was somewhat paranoid, but to be honest, there were plenty of attempts on his life, so it does seem it's rather justified. Even though he had a dark side to him, Cao also had a practical side to him as well. For example, he enacted a policy of farming as much land as possible to ensure the people could be well fed. For example, soldiers off duty would be allowed to own abandoned land and cultivate it. And then if they needed to be recalled to the military, they were. The policy worked wonders for the state, and the people didn't need to worry about famines or anything under Cao's rule. As well as this, Cao did try his best to Sinocize the Xiongnu peoples to the north, so he allowed these people to be brought into the province of Shaanxi. The reason why he did this was because he wanted to use them in his military to help him unify the country. Now this policy would come back to backfire, but for now let's just leave it there. Because even Cao's son, Cao Pi, continued this tradition when he became the Emperor of Wei in 220. That's right, Cao did rise through the ranks to become King of Wei, but Empress Xian of the Han was still there. However, when Cao died in 220, Cao Pi took over and then simply booted Emperor Xian out of his seat and declared himself Emperor of a new dynasty. Moving away from the practical policies, I will end on the last note about Cao's rule and subsequently Cao Wei. This is Cao's love of the arts, and in particular poetry. Cao was a gifted scholar and he was a lover of poetry. In his spare time, Cao would often cite poetry or write his own poems, a talent which he passed on to his sons, Tao Pi and Tao Zhi. They were called the Three Taos because of the poems that they wrote, and they are credited with beginning the Jian'an style of poetry, which would later influence the Tang Dynasty poets. Now keep that in mind, because the Tang Dynasty is known as the peak, the pinnacle of Chinese poetry overall. So, that kind of sums up Tao Wei pretty much. The Tao family may have been paranoid, but for a good reason, and Cao Cao himself, as much as he was paranoid, he was also a lover of the arts, and he did make genuine attempts to better the lives of the people. So that is Tao Wei, and the Northerners sorted out. But what about Sun Quan's Dongwu? What policies did he enact? To be honest, the historical records and sources in general are rather scarce to find, and this isn't just for Dongwu, it's for Shuhan as well. And the reason why is because a lot of the court that the Tao Wei family managed to get together was then taken over by the Jin, and then it is the Jin who reunified China. So of course, the other two dynasties, or kingdoms if you will, they kind of get left out. Anyway, what Sun Quan did very well, and this is when he outshone his brother Sun Ce and his father Sun Jian, is that when he inherited the second largest state within China at the age of 18, he managed to create stability. Now Sun Quan, by all accounts, was extremely clever, who had a great education, he was a man of valour and a steadfast ruler. Sun Quan managed to get a lot of people to his court, and what he did do very well was that he managed to keep his old retainers, so people such as Huang Gai, Cheng Pu, and of course Zhou Yu were all old retainers of the Sun family, but then he also brought in people like Lu Su, Hua He, and the Zhang brothers, and Zhuge Liang's elder brother Zhuge Ke. Sun Quan managed to coordinate his state, and capable generals who could easily contend with Tao Wei to the north, which was proven in the Battle of Red Cliff, and he could also get administrators to administer his state really well. Examples of this are through their historical writings. The most noteworthy minister in this regard is Hu Zong, who wrote the Wu Shu, or Book of Wu. Here, Hu Zong, a study partner of Sun Quan, describes when Sun Quan had a dream of a yellow dragon appearing in Xiakou, which is in modern-day Hebei province. Since having the dream, Sun Quan decided to declare himself emperor of a new dynasty in 229. Xue Yong and his son, Xue Yin, were also noteworthy characters here. They wrote another history of Wu, which Sun Hao, the last emperor of Wu, admired a lot. When Xue Zong died, Sun Hao ordered Xue Yin, his son, to continue his father's work. When Wu fell to the Jin dynasty, which I will get to in a few weeks, it was Xue Yin who wrote the letter of capitulation to the Jin forces. Xue Yin then served the Jin court, who welcomed him and his family because they admired him so much. So that just goes to highlight the kind of characters that Sun Quan managed to get to his court, and how his descendants benefited from these characters later on as well. But as much as Sun Quan was successful in getting talented people to his court, what the Jiandong region lacked more than anything was people. The region had been severely depopulated by Emperors Qin Shi Huang and Huan Wudi, either through military campaigns or through edicts. In this way, the area was large but very sparsely populated, and this was what Sun Quan lacked more than anything. When it comes to diplomacy though, Sun Quan was actually extremely clever as well. For example, he knew, as well as Zhuge Liang knew, that an alliance between the states of Shu and Wu was essential for survival when dealing with Tao Wei to the north. Therefore, he did concede Jin province temporarily to Liu Bei after the Battle of Red Cliff. But that does not mean to say that Sun Quan was weak-minded. Rather the opposite. He was very practical, and he does get Jin province back, as we will see later on in this episode. But that is my conclusion about the Dongwu region under the rule of the Sun family. So now, the last kingdom that we will take a look at is of course Shu Han, established by Liu Bei. I already kind of talked about Liu Bei and his mannerisms in my last couple of episodes, but when he conquered Yi province or the Riverlands, he became almost a different person. For example, Liu Jiang, the guy who he took the province from, wasn't exactly a bad ruler. He just didn't focus on military matters, but all in all, the people and officials of the province were treated with kindness. Liu Bei, though, took a bit more of a stern approach. He argued that the officials were treated too kindly, therefore didn't do their jobs properly. So as much as Liu Bei is seen as a man of the people, he did have legalist tendencies toward him when he actually became a ruler of a big state. He was in favour of Confucianism, as his ancestors had been, but he seen the need to create order within his state. An example of this would be putting a curfew in place under his rule, which is a legalist policy, which was introduced by Qin Shi Huang. By the same time, Liu Bei did gear up his state for war, and went on a large recruitment draft. What's surprising is that Shu Han was definitely the weakest of the three kingdoms, but they were also the most aggressive. And again, they had the same problems as Dongwu. They simply didn't have the manpower that the north had during this time. Despite this though, Liu Bei managed to attract a lot of people to his side, but after Liu Bei, you have his god-awful emperor's son, Liu Shan, inherit the throne. Liu Shan is known as one of the worst emperors in Chinese history. Not because he was cruel or anything, but because he was just so dumb. Now I can't entirely blame Liu Shan here. If you want to believe Romance of the Three Kingdoms, when Liu Bei was running away from Cao Cao at the Battle of Changban Bridge, one of his top generals, Zhao Yun, held Liu Shan in his cloak while he fought off all of Cao Cao's men single-handedly. He got to Liu Bei and presented the baby Liu Shan to his lord, but Liu Bei threw his son to the ground and held Zhao Yun up. Maybe that throw and knock on the head is what made Liu Shan as stupid as he actually was. Who knows? Anyway, Shu Han did okay under the management of Zhuge Liang, who led the expeditions which I mentioned at the beginning of the show, but once he died, there was no check on Liu Shan and he basically ran the state to the ground because he got very friendly with brown-nosing eunuchs. And we all know what happens when eunuchs get too much power in court now, don't we? Anyway, that's a wee round off of the policies introduced and things like that between the three different kingdoms which emerged in China in the 3rd century. But for now, we'll get back to the narrative tale to finish this off. So like I said, Liu Bei had established himself in Yi province, and he had control over Jin province too. Now Sun Quan's emissaries came knocking on the door as soon as Liu Bei had gotten himself settled in his new home at Chengdu, gently reminding him, remember how you borrowed Jin province from us until you could conquer your own territory? Well, guess what? You did that. Time to give us it back. To which there would be a, oh yeah, well, let me arrange that, and then, of course, nothing happened. Seeing that this wasn't working, Sun Quan tried a different tactic. He proposed a marriage between his younger sister and Liu Bei, to which Liu Bei agreed. Now, again, if you want to believe Romance of the Three Kingdoms, this is like a ploy to get Liu Bei into Sun Quan's territory, and then from there, he could be held as a hostage, and he would be held there until Jin province was returned. That was the thinking anyway, but again, like in the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Zhuge Liang sees through this scheme and he manages to save Liu Bei anyway. But that's back to the novel. Anyway, just remember this, that Liu Bei himself at this time in history was 50 years old, and Sun Ren, Sun Quan's sister, was only 18. That's gross. But the marriage did cement the alliance between Wu and Shu for the time being. Sun Ren was also a constant reminder that Liu Bei shouldn't go back on his word, so that's why Sun Quan arranged the marriage in the first place. Luckily for Liu Bei at that time though, Cao Cao had begun mobilizing his forces in the north, so he told Sun Quan that the problem of Jin province can be resolved after this conflict with Cao Cao. to which Sun Quan agreed, and the two allies marched to war. Liu Bei attacked Wei in the west at Hangzhong, while Sun Quan launched an attack from the east at Hefei. Liu Bei won this engagement, and he had even more land to his name now, whereas Sun Quan kinda just made it to a stalemate and then withdrew. Now, Liu Bei really should have given the province over to Sun Quan at this stage, but of course that didn't happen. What happened instead was that Cao Cao died in the year 220, and then his son Cao Pi declared himself emperor of the new Wei dynasty, and in response, Liu Bei declared himself king of Hangzhong. He wasn't emperor yet, but that's where the trend was going anyway. And as Liu Bei declared himself king, Guan Yu wanted to celebrate by attacking Wei from his station at Jing province. Guan Yu definitely was doing well in the campaign in attacking Wei, as he was winning every engagement, but he wasn't really advancing far. Like, for example, he was able to flood one of Wei's cities, and he defeated some of the generals and things, but he was just kind of stuck there, winning these battles. Now, what Guan Yu was totally unaware of was that Jing province was being eyed up from Sun Quan to the east. Sensing an opportunity to cement the alliance further though, Sun Quan tried to propose a marriage between his son and Guan Yu's daughter, to which Guan Yu rebuffed in a very rude manner by all accounts. I will talk more about that in a later episode when I dedicate one episode to Guan Yu alone. But for now, back on with the story. Sun Quan, of course, was infuriated when he heard what Guan Yu had to say about the proposal, and he immediately wrote a letter to Wei saying he would attack Shu Han and retake Jing province. Basically, all he said was to keep Guan Yu busy up there. The man in charge of this attack was a student of Zhou Yu who had already passed away, and this man was called Lu Meng. Liu Meng did his best to keep his attack as secret as possible. His army moved fast and captured all of Guan Yu's defense towers in secret. Liu Meng captured the guards and used them as guides to the next tower. The guards were reminded that if they did anything out of line, their families also lived in those defenses, if you get what I mean. So of course, the guards obeyed, and the operation was going very swimmingly. Liu Meng had infiltrated Jing province, and Guan Yu was none the wiser, until he seen Lu Meng's banners moving towards his position. Trapped between the forces of Wei to the north and Wu to the south, Guan Yu tried to retreat back to Yi province. But alas, he was caught by Lu Meng's men, where he was then beheaded. So yay! Sun Quan finally got Jing province back. But oh damn, Guan Yu wasn't actually supposed to have been killed. When Sun Quan heard that Guan Yu was killed, he immediately wrote a letter to Liu Bei, basically saying, "You went back on your word, so I took Jing province by force, but didn't mean to kill your sworn brother, so can we be friends?" Naturally, Liu Bei was extremely angry, didn't listen to any logic. He then declared himself emperor, and his first degree as emperor was to annihilate Dongwu in revenge for Guan Yu. Liu Bei amassed an army of what was said to be 700,000 men and marched east to take out Sun Quan and Wu. However, Liu Bei's campaign didn't get off to a good start. His other sworn brother, Zhang Fei, was assassinated in his sleep by his own subordinates, and then they ran to Sun Quan's court. Even more furious now, Liu Bei went full steam ahead into Wu territory. With ease, he took back Jing province, and it honestly looked like it was the end of Wu and Sun Quan. But then, Sun Quan appointed Lu Xun as the commanding officer of his army. Lu Xun replaced Lu Meng, probably due to the whole killing Guan Yu thing, and he immediately set up a defensive strategy. He simply wanted to stall the Shu forces and stabilize the front, to which he did brilliantly. Liu Bei's army tried time and time again to goad the Sun army into battle, but under strict orders from Lu Xun, the Wu forces didn't move. Now, there is a story that one of Sun Quan's younger cousins disobeyed this order. And of course, he said to Lu Xun, "What are you going to do about it? My cousin's the leader." And then Lu Xun basically said, "Well, he's not here right now, and you disobeyed military law, which means you're going to get executed." And he followed through with the execution. Anyway, eventually, Liu Bei had to retreat temporarily, as his men in the open field were becoming sick as they hadn't acclimatized to the different weather in Dongwu territory, and it was the height of summer now. Liu Bei made a critical error by sending his men into the forest nearby to shade from the sun and keep cooler. By doing this, he created almost a 70-mile front with his men scattered in different parts of the woods. This was a huge mistake. Lu Xun seen his opportunity, and he immediately gathered his generals and laid out his plan to them. It was a hot summer's night, and while the Shu forces were settled in for the night, the soldiers of Wu were on the move. The Wu soldiers brought plenty of oil with them, and then they set it alight. From their positions outside the forest, they lit the tips of their arrows and began firing their fire arrows into the Shu positions within the forest. Soon, a huge fire had erupted in the forest, as all of the trees or wood was extremely dry from the heat. As the Shu army seen the disaster unfolding before their eyes, they tried to retreat out of the forest, where the Wu forces were waiting for them, and as a consequence, the army of 700,000 Liu Bei had started off with was slaughtered and annihilated. Some sources say that more than 100,000 people died in this battle alone in one night. Liu Bei himself was almost killed in the conflict, and only by luck did he manage to escape the battle, and he rested up in Baidicheng, or Baidi Castle. The Wu forces wanted to press on with the victory, but luckily for Shu, Zhuge Liang did arrive on the scene with reinforcements and stopped the Wu army from advancing. Liu Bei, unable to recover from his shame of the defeat and possibly battle wounds, died in Baidi later on, from which Zhuge Liang became the regent for his son Liu Shan. Zhuge Liang immediately recognized the defeat and then signed an alliance with Sun Quan once again. From here, Zhuge Liang embarked on a campaign south, as there was a rebellion by the Nanman peoples there. It was here that Zhuge Liang secured the rear of his forces and began marching towards Wei. Speaking of Wei, Cao Pi died from an illness rather early in his reign, and it was now Cao Fang who was the emperor. Cao Fang was still young, so he relied heavily on his officials to deal with Zhuge Liang's northern encroachments. None of them, particularly the Cao family themselves, had the answer for Zhuge Liang, apart from an up-and-coming official by the name of Sima Yi. Sima Yi had served Cao Cao, and by all accounts, Cao Cao warned his son to watch out for this guy, as he was ambitious. And it was true, because Sima Yi's successful defense of Wei territory made him really popular among scholars within the court, and of course the Cao family didn't like that at all. Not that it mattered, because Sima Yi launched a coup in 249 and had the Prime Minister Tao Xuan killed in the process. From there, Sima Yi controlled the last child Wei emperor on the throne. Kind of ironic, considering that's how Cao Cao got to power with the last Han emperor. From his position of power, the Sima clan began to fill in court positions just like Cao Cao did with his family all those years ago. And then the Western Jin Dynasty was established in the year 265. And that, my friends, is where I will leave the episode for today. The reason being that I have covered a lot of ground in the episode, and I realise that this episode will be way longer than my usual ones. But speaking of long episodes, next week you won't just be hearing me on the show, but a fellow podcaster by the name of John Zhu. He runs his own shows based on the Chinese classics of literature. He completed his podcast Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and he is now currently working on his second show, The Water Margin. Be sure to tune in to next week's episode, as John and I will discuss the novel, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and compare it to the historical texts. But until then, don't forget to share the show with people who may be interested in Chinese history, and leave a review if you have a spare 5 minutes. It really does help the show immensely. But until then, this is Dean from The Chronicle Show, and once again, thanks for listening.